Hello and welcome, everybody. This is the Curious Minds podcast, episode number 2. And today our topic is going to be everything librarian and libraries and books. So if you're like me and you don't like to read, you might want to just skip this week's episode. But no, I'm just kidding. We're going to learn a lot about what happens in public libraries today. Sitting across from me is Shannon Kraushaar, who is the head of information services for the public library system in the state of Maryland. And she has a master's degree in library science, a bachelor's degree in English. And we're going to talk a lot about public libraries today across the state of Maryland, which is probably similar to whatever state you might be listening in, the way they operate, the way they function, services they offer, and all things like that. I know that from talking with Shannon, it's a interesting activities in the library, things that you never think about when you think of services that a public library offers. So I thought in one case it's interesting just to find out a little bit about what it means to be a librarian, but also what services you might be able to get at your public library that you didn't even realize they offered. Because I think there's a lot of things that people don't realize. So as we continue to interview on the Curious Minds podcast, people with interesting jobs, people that have interesting skills and knowledge that they can pass along to us, that's kind of what the podcast is all about. Hopefully you enjoyed episode 1. If you did not, please go back and check it out. It's all about the Second Amendment. And as we just get started here, we're just kind of feeling out how this process is going to go, and we'll keep recording podcasts with interesting people and interesting topics. So we titled this one, Shannon, The Book Stops Here, as my predilection for puns and bad jokes just cannot be controlled. So we wanted to invite you in, so welcome. Good morning.
Good morning.
And in general, let's just start. What do you do?
Well, I am head of information services, as you said. So basically the translated version of that is I am in charge of the department that serves adults. So that is 18 to 100. Or 105 if you're lucky enough to live
if you're lucky enough to live. And by the way, a little bit closer to your microphone, sure, too, or just pull it in towards you a little bit. So you said, what was your starting age?
My starting age was 24. I was the youngest person working in my library system when I was hired.
Gotcha. And the people that you serve as adult services ranges from what again?
From 18 to death.
But you deal with anybody who comes into the library.
Correct. So. Now, I'm lucky enough to work in the central branch of my library system, which means that we're a little bit more siloed. So we have specific departments for children. We have specific departments for teens. If I was in a smaller location, it would be much more all hands on deck. Everybody serves everybody. So mine's a little bit unique in that way.
So that because you work in the main branch of the library, you guys deal with a lot more things because you're bigger.
Yes. There's about, I think, 60 people that work in my branch where I'm located. And then some of our little branch libraries might only have 2 or 3 people working there. Oh,
wow. So you offer a lot more availability of services and a lot more options than people can get in their satellite libraries, at least on a daily basis.
Sometimes. We have the benefit of one of the things that I oversee is like our local history room. And that is a great resource for individuals who are doing genealogy research or history research, and it deals all with the area where we live. So that brings people from out of state, and so that is a unique service to the Central Library branch. I have to give our branches credit, though. They really do provide some amazing programs on a really shoestring set of staff.
So, and budget, I'm sure.
Yes.
So my second question is, people think of a librarian as, don't you just sit in there and help people find a book? I mean, I know we don't have card catalogs anymore, but, I want to come in and I want to find a book. Isn't that kind of what librarians do? What other things do you deal with? Not on an administrative side, because your role is somewhat of an administrator as well, but as a librarian per se, dealing with the public, what are services that people sometimes come in and ask for?
Well, one of the big things is trying to sort of bridge the digital divide. That's a big topic in libraries right now. So if a person can walk in carrying a piece of technology, they will ask you questions about it and expect you to have to be able to fix it for them.
So it's like the Apple Store.
Yeah, correct.
Except for it's grandma and she doesn't have anyone in her family
Yes.
to ask. And no offense to older people, but the more technologically challenged people probably tend to be those that didn't grow up with it.
Yes, if you give grandma a Kindle for Christmas and don't teach her how to use it, there is a librarian somewhere who will be showing her how to do it.
Now, are you guys trained in that, or do you kind of just have to be ahead of the curve and teach yourselves?
We have some training in terms of, we have what's called the e-library. So that's all of the digital downloads. So downloading ebooks, audiobooks, even movies, documentaries, things that are accessible remotely.
Gotcha.
And that we receive training in. In terms of just keeping up with technology, I mean, one of the questions that I probably get 5 times a shift is, I need to print something. It's in my email, but my cell phone app is logged in. I don't know my email password, so I can't log in. We don't have wireless printing. So it becomes a matter of how can we teach them how to forward an email to an email that we can access so we can print it for them.
Gotcha.
And all kinds of, we have, lots of public access computer terminals. So constantly getting sort of waved over to help people.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that here in a second. So yeah, the computer terminals is something we're going to talk a little bit more about when we get deeper into the interview, for lack of a better term. People think of librarians as, the old lady with the glasses that sits behind the desk and yells at people to be quiet. But you're not old, and you do have the glasses. And yes, it has to be, somewhat reasonably quiet in the library. But what are the misconceptions you think that people have about librarians, or people that do your job? What are some of the things that people come in and go, oh, you're nicer than I thought, or you're this, or you actually know about that? What are some of the big surprises that people find?
One of the questions that always cracks me up the most is people will come in and go, oh, are you a volunteer? I'm going to do it 40 hours a week for free.
Why do you think they think that?
I think because I've never really thought about it, but I guess because in smaller libraries, libraries do rely on volunteers a lot,
okay.
But I think there is a misconception about the level of education that you need in order to become a librarian with a capital L.
Understood. So people just assume you just kind of sit here and take care of the books, but that there's not an education that comes behind it.
Correct. It's sort of, my comparison is it would be like taking a CPR class and calling yourself a doctor.
So let's talk about the education. So you didn't start off in college, or did you start off in college thinking, when I grow up, I want to be a librarian?
No,
You majored in English. What did you have in mind at that point?
I started in biology.
Biology.
And then I couldn't pass chemistry because I'm terrible at math. So I switched to English and fell in love with it. And what I thought I wanted to do was be a book editor.
Okay.
And for a brief while after I graduated undergrad, I did work for a publisher I was naive enough to not realize that they were very disreputable.
Okay.
So it didn't last there for long because it was kind of like a meat market for books. It wasn't a very reputable
Quality
publisher.
Okay.
Yeah. So after that, I didn't have a job, and it was literally my mom looked through the newspaper and said, oh, there's a 20-hour position open at the library. You should go apply for it. That seems like it would be something you could do. And I was like, yeah, sure. I need a job. And 18 years later, and I'm still there. So,
well, you when you went in there, was it what you thought it was going to be, or did you too find a lot of surprises about what the library did?
Back then, and that's going to sound very silly, but the library is a very nimble organization because we have to be. So the amount of change that I've seen just in 18 years is staggering. So when I went in there, it was much more traditional than it is now. It was much more the librarian with the bun and the ruler slapping your knuckles and telling you to be quiet.
So it was your grandfather's library.
Correct. Yes. And over time, we have really morphed into being a community space, a space for everyone, making sure equity is a big part of it, making sure everyone has equitable access to information, technology, services.
Well, in the last 20 years alone, you just think about how much our digital lives have changed with internet, with cell phones, with iPads and iPods, and all of well, I guess not iPods so much anymore, but that's how long it's been that we've gone through that cycle, and all of these devices, Kindles and Nintendos, and all these handheld mobile devices that kids and adults are now using on a regular basis. So it's much like a school where you have to be able to say, this is what the public is buying at Best Buy for Christmas. We better be prepared to teach them how to use it or to be familiar with it. Otherwise, you become obsolete.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And that's a big challenge for libraries who, the other misconception is people say, well, why do I need a library if I have Google? Well, it's trying to find reputable information on Google is sort of like trying to drink out of a fire hose. I mean, you get 12 billion results, and information literacy is a big part of knowing what information is reputable and vetting it, and not just taking the word of whatever the first sponsored link that pops up is.
Right. Yeah. It's not just, and you learn a lot of that when you go to school, I assume, for your master's degree too, is, I know from when I went to school, the thing you learn with your higher level degrees is kind of to become more discerning about what information you're using and to recognize, okay, where did this study come from? Where did this data come from? Is that a reputable source, or is that somebody that has their thumb on the scale, that has money invested and wants that survey to say a certain thing or wants that data to skew a certain way to support their point of view? So you kind of learn I'm sure in your, and I wanted to ask you about your master's degree, how that came about. When you went for your master's degree and you start delving into a little bit more, okay, so not that you need a master's degree to know that Wikipedia is not the most reliable source, but it probably does teach you a lot about how to cross-reference sources so that you can help the public get the most valuable and accurate information.
There definitely is that, and there is a lot of practical training. Surprisingly, my master's degree was much more theoretical. That's not the case with all library schools, but I was part of a new program, and I think we're going to talk about that in a little bit, but mine was very much like the tenets of librarianship, why we do what we do, these higher level concepts. I have learned so much on the practical side from the continuing education that we do, and just from working in a public library for so long. You kind of learn as you go. And there were so many people when I was in grad school who went straight from their undergrad into their master's in library science and hadn't the faintest clue what working in a library is actually like.
Yeah, it's the same for, I don't know if I mentioned it in the first podcast, but I'm a teacher, and it's the same with teaching. You come out of school, and you can always tell the first or second year, no offense to them, teachers who got their bachelor's, got their master's, and now they're stepping foot in a classroom for the first time, and they realize that everything they read in the books and in the studies doesn't necessarily apply to real life. And I paused and worked for a while, as I think you did between your bachelor's and your master's. So when you go in for your higher level degree, you start looking at it and going, okay, this makes more sense to me now because I've been in a situation where X has occurred, or I know that that is not really how it works. And so you can tell when you read a textbook from someone written from the ivory tower and has never been in a classroom, those that sit there in the lecture hall and laugh are the ones that have been out in the real life, and those that sit there and go, oh, okay, and write it down are the ones that haven't.
Very much
so. Let's talk about your master's degree. How did that come about? What did you decide to do, or how did you figure out what you were going to do for your master's?
Well, after about 8 years working in the library, I was like, okay, I'm home. This is my home career. Like, this is my home library system. I knew I wanted to get my master's, but unfortunately, as most higher education is prohibitively expensive, I was working full time at that point. I had sort of supplemented my 120-hour with another 20-hour to become full time. But even so, I mean, nobody being a teacher, nobody becomes a librarian to be rich.
Right.
That is not the case here. And so I kept sort of putting off going for my master's because the debt that I would have been in would have been outrageous. And one of my very good mentors, I've been blessed with a lot of really good mentors, saw that there was an opportunity for a scholarship at University of Maryland. and said, hey, you should go for this. You should see if you can get this scholarship. And I only had like 8 days to apply for it. So I'm frantically trying to get transcripts.
And what were the merits to get the scholarship? What did you have to, was it just like everybody who wants to can apply, or did you have to apply based on certain criteria?
It was anybody who wants to apply can apply. But it was an MLS, a master's degree in library science, but the concentration was information in diverse populations. And I had taken a very strong interest in some of our lesser served populace in my 8 years working in the library system. And so I had particularly compelling reasons why I wanted to further my education in this area.
And when you say lesser served, can you talk a little bit about what population you mean when you say lesser served?
Yeah, absolutely. So individuals experiencing homelessness, individuals at different socioeconomic statuses, mixed families, individuals who are English is not their first language. They might be not native born to the United States. They might have immigrated here.
So a lot of these populations are underserved in a lot of venues of their life. So it's the kind of people that you think of when you go, these people are probably not through to no fault of their own, educated enough to use the library on their own. They're not the type to go out and seek the information or to know where to find the information. And we want to reach out to the goal of the program, as I'm understanding you say it, was we're going to try to target those people that maybe don't have school experience enough to even understand what the library can offer, and we want to help the community and as a whole, not just the people who went to college who know how to come in and do research.
Correct. And it's very much another really big part of that we talked about, and that includes too, like people of differing, like people with disabilities, people who may have mental illness, people who may have developmental disabilities. So just anybody that's not your standard. I took great pride in being able to help those people.
Gotcha.
And so that's a lot what the degree focused on. And
how long did it take you to do that while you were working full time?
4 semesters.
That's fast.
I
feel like
was lucky to get a full ride scholarship.
Okay.
Through this program. It was brand new. It was a pilot program, and there were 20 of us that they gave scholarships to be sort of the gophers, the guinea pigs, and figure out, how is this program going to work?
Across the whole state of Maryland.
It was the only program of its type in the country at that time.
So were there people from out of state that were among that 20, or were they mostly tried to serve the people in state?
It was mostly in state, and we had a mixture of people who were already working in Maryland Public Libraries and a mixture of people who, like I said, had never been part of a working library environment before. But I believe that mostly everyone was Maryland. And they may have, but Maryland, if I can go on a slight tangent,
sure.
Maryland is very unique in terms of their library systems because it's called library heaven, because we work very well together. Library systems. We have very strong representation legislatively.
You mean from county to county?
From county to county.
So throughout the state, your library system works well with another county. In other words, it's coordinated.
Correct. And so are all of our legislative or our advocacy efforts.
Gotcha.
Which makes us a lot more powerful because we all agree to ask for the same ask.
So it's sort of a union of libraries versus each county going in and saying, this is what we want. No, this is what our county wants. Now you go in and go, all of our counties agree, the whole state is against you, this is what we need.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's exactly correct. And so I'm very blessed to work in a state like that. And so it wouldn't surprise me if University of Maryland deliberately wanted to pour the money and the resources and the education into in-state candidates.
Right. They're trying to build their own.
Correct.
So advocacy is one thing we'll probably get to in a little while, but what administrative tasks? So public-facing tasks, I think we've talked about a lot. Help me with my gadget, help me figure out my email, help me access this, help me find this book, help me find. And by the way, throughout the podcast, there's already been some up. I'll put up some pictures, some that you've shared with me and some that, just generic ideas for people that maybe have never been to a local public library of things. And one of the ones you sent me was people that come in and don't really know, they have very little information, but they want to know what book it is that they either read or saw at one point. And so I'll try to put it up here. The picture that I think you did of a setup that said, I don't know what the name of the book is, but it was blue. And so you did a whole 4-foot section of just blue books, because I'm sure these are things that you hear. Quite funny, really, that, I know as a teacher, sometimes I'll get a kid that'll say, Mr. K, what was that song what song are you talking about? The song that it had like music to it. And I'm like, okay.
It was about love.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I'm like, so you get people that come in and it's really cute what you can see. You have a little, like, that's an administrative task, a little bit outside of the public when you set up displays and things like that. What are some other administrative tasks that are not, say, public facing or when you're not interacting with the public? What are other things that you have to do there?
Well, I'm going to, if I can, talk a little bit about what I would do if I were still in a librarian role versus what I do as an administrator.
And include both, please.
Yeah. So as a librarian, one of the biggest portions of what they do, is providing programming. So programming can be anything from entertainment, so like having a movie night, having a craft circle, having a book club, to educational things. There's a program in the state of Maryland called Lawyer in the Library, where we actually bring in pro bono lawyers to give advice on civil matters for free to the public. We have health lectures, we have concerts, we have a lot of programming for children. That's sort of the lifeblood a lot of times of libraries.
And I know you've mentioned before things that people wouldn't expect, like a Comic-Con.
Oh, yeah.
Where people come in and are dressed as characters and book characters, movie characters. So what I'm getting from a lot of those things, because I wouldn't have expected you to have a free lawyer or a free music concert or at a library, so there's a lot of services that are just specifically designed to make it a community place. Beyond just, almost a community outreach center, beyond just come get your book or your information on Beethoven. This is like, oh, hey, come in and we're going to provide you with cultural experiences outside. And so as a librarian, not necessarily as an administrator, but as a librarian, part of your job is to come up with ideas and pitch them to the powers that be and say, hey, I think this would be great for our community. And then planning it, organizing, finding the artists or finding the people to come in. That falls on the librarian.
Correct. And in addition, like one of the services that we offer, we used to do computer classes all the time, like basics, email basics, searching basics. And we found that...
Could you make sure you touch on how not to reply all? Lesson 1, reply sender.
And like how to avoid clicking links and phishing emails.
Right.
And,
what to
general
look for
safety.
Yep.
And so we found that people, as a whole, I think the public is getting more technology savvy. Mm-hmm. When I started, it was nobody knew how to do anything. And so computers were still new enough. It was 2006 when I started. Right. So the demand was not as high and people were not as well educated. But now we find that they don't want to come in and learn an email basics class. It's very task-based. So it's like, I need to reapply for housing and I have no idea how to log into this portal and fill out this application.
That's progress. That's progress in your community. So I never thought about this, but you probably have a great gauge of what people know in your community based on what they're coming to ask for. So I would consider that a victory for the library and for people in general when you can say, hey, guess what? You ever notice people aren't coming in asking us how to tie their shoes now? Now they're asking us how to double knot. Or now they're asking us how to lace their shoes differently to make them fit tight. Like you're progressing from, in my world, where to put your finger to play this note to how do we play this musical phrase with better feeling.
Yes.
And so I guess that's a great insight. You can kind of gauge the progress that you're making as a library by the community's needs. And you go, okay, it looks like, not that you're the only one teaching email, but just in general, you have to base how you move forward on what you're seeing in the community. And you go, okay, how to access your Hotmail account, pretty obsolete at this point. We need to replace that with how to use Microsoft Office online or how to use a Google what is it, the Google Drive, or how to use, that's interesting.
And that's another thing too. As my library, there's some libraries that are under the umbrella of government. So, but
I was going to ask about that. Is your library, is it government of the county, or is it a private
No, we're
company?
nonprofit. We're a 501c3, my
Okay.
particular library system.
Okay.
Now, it gets a little confusing because we receive state funding, we receive county funding, we have a lot of people that we answer to
Right.
politically, but not.
Right. In other words, if you want more of our money, there's certain dances that you better learn.
Correct.
But over and above the money that you receive from them, you're not employees of the state.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes. But we do receive some benefits that way. So like our health insurance
Right.
is lumped in with the county commissioners. So it's kind of a confusing mishmash.
Yeah.
But my library system is
More of a government contractor.
right. Is one of the oldest in the state of Maryland. So we're a little bit wonky in terms
gotcha.
of that. But I would love to, if I may, point out some of the services that
You may not. I'm moving on. No, I'm just joking. Go ahead. Of course.
No,
That's why you're here.
One of the things that I think a lot of the larger library systems, I don't work for a massive library system, but one of the things that I think people would be shocked by is libraries are doing new innovative things like having a library of things. So like I need to check out a weed whacker. Or I would like to check out a fishing pole.
Wow.
And that's something that...
That's happening in Maryland.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely. There's at Pratt Library in Baltimore. That's the largest library system or the largest library in the state of Maryland. They have what they call a makerspace, which is another big thing that's coming in libraries where they have access to like a 3D printer.
Oh, that's
They
cool.
have a recording studio. So if you
Gotcha.
wanted to come in and record music or record a podcast, all the equipment is there.
Oh my gosh. So I spent all this money for nothing.
Well, you'd have to drive to Baltimore to use it.
Yeah, good point. Good point.
But
Might be worth just buying it myself and keeping it here.
There's a statewide initiative right now where public libraries are going to be dispensing free Chromebooks to individuals who qualify.
Gotcha.
So if it's like, they're on food stamps WIC, or
Right.
if they, are below a certain poverty level. And so they're all getting handed out through the library system.
Gotcha. Sorry, I just noticed moving around under the table is Zoe, the pod dog. She's got a little restless there, so she sticks her head in. She's a sweetie, but she did the same thing on episode 1. She just has to get her. There you go. You get to see her a little bit in Shannon's shot, but she'll lay back down here. But she's an integral part of the studios here for the Curious Minds podcast. So. Private organization gets government funding, follows some of the guidelines there from the strings attached to the money from the government. Are there any other administrative tasks that you specifically do in your role?
Yeah, so my role is kind of wrangling cats a little bit, but I think it's middle management. So I think anytime you're middle management, that is the case. I have the masters above me and the masters below me.
Gotcha. Yeah, exactly. Where do you rank roughly, if you feel comfortable talking about that?
I'm probably like third or fourth down the chain in my library system.
In your library system.
Yeah.
So fair to say, without trying to brag, you have a lot of people under you, a lot of people that you're responsible for, but also you guys are kind of broken into departments too. So you being head of the adult and information services, if I quoted that correctly, you have a certain group of people that work under you or with you, as opposed to other categories who technically might be under you, but they don't work for you.
Correct. I'm not in the chain of command.
Right, exactly.
But in terms of top down, like the only time that really matters is when everybody in administration is out of the building,
Right.
who has to deal with the problems.
Right.
Which is
it's kind of like the thing where they talk about okay, how many people have to die before the Speaker of the House is in charge of the country?
Right.
It's like, okay, so as you move up the chain a little bit and you have a little bit more as far as, responsibilities, I would assume. What are some of those higher level responsibilities that other people don't have to deal with?
well, budget, scheduling, all of the tedious, that sort of stuff. I'm also responsible for ensuring that the direction of the department is in alignment with the strategic plan of the library.
Okay, understood. So to make sure that if your target is over here, you're not aiming over here.
Correct. And there are certain tenets that we have in each strategic plan that we focus on. So one of the ones that we're currently focusing on is self-directed learning. So
tenants, not meaning people who rent space, meaning
tenants. Maybe I pronounced it wrong.
No, I don't think it was you. I at first I heard like people thought of it as people renting space. I have a feeling it's the same word, but tenets, like TENETS.
Yes.
Okay, sorry. So yeah, like beliefs or ideas that you want to follow. Okay.
Correct.
Okay.
And so one of those is self-directed learning. So one of the things I have some of my folks working on is we partnered with Google to do, they have a program called Grow with Google that allows people to take courses and get certified in the G Suite. And that's something that they can take to an employer and say, hey, I got this certification from Google. Or there's another one called North Star Digital Literacy, which is it's computer classes, but ones that you can do on your own time.
Is the G Suite like all the Google Drives and the Google
Correct.
software?
Sheets and
Sheets
forms
and docs.
and all of that.
Very cool. Anything else that you do what do you spend the bulk of your time doing, honestly?
The bulk of my time is mostly, I don't have the fun job anymore. I don't get to do the book displays. Now public service, if there is a gap on my public service desk, I'm out there. Because that's the most critical part is the face-to-face
serving
with
the public, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
That is our primary function. Beyond that, I would say just making sure all of the bits and pieces of the department are running smoothly. So making sure all the desks are covered, making sure all of the promotional materials for...
And when you say desks are covered, you're talking about making sure that each public-facing position, there's somebody there taking care of the public.
Correct.
Okay.
And that is all of the hours that we are open, which we have more open hours at the central branch than we do anywhere else.
What are your hours?
Our hours are, we just changed them.
That's okay, but roughly?
9 to 8, Monday through Thursday, 9 to 6 on Friday, 9 to 5 on Saturday, 1 to 5 on Sunday.
Okay.
So we're
7 days a week. And how many staff members do you have that you have to schedule for, roughly? To cover all those
fully
times.
Staffed, I supervise 16 direct reports. In a day, that might be 6 to 8 people, depending on the day. And weekends are very thin.
And that includes anybody who now is like restocking books, reshelving books, your department, or do you have people, a different department that handles that?
No, that falls under our very, very hardworking circulation department. They do all the checkouts, all the reshelving, all of the pulling books.
So your people are more in the teaching the classes and serving the customer.
Yes.
Okay.
And well, I mean, Cirque serves the customers a lot too, because they're the point of, if you want to take something out,
right,
they're the ones who have to do it.
Right.
For
Exactly.
you.
Right.
So, and then children's services, obviously they do programming directed towards children and some of the reference type materials for that age range. Now,
do they still do, this is just a question that popped into my head, is there still microfiche, microfilm, or is mostly everything computer? Like, how does the library look different now than it might have looked 25 years ago as far as resources?
Well, we still have microfilm.
Okay. Is that typical or not?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Because, well, for example, we have newspapers on microfilm going back to 1790. Those have not been digitized.
Well, do you expect that would ever be the case?
It will be the case eventually, but it is currently so cost prohibitive.
I would expect. Are there companies that do that, or does it happen internally when most people do it?
There are. We actually, our local history room, we had donated a bunch of newspapers from the 1800s that were falling apart. I mean, crumbling to dust under our eyes. And it does not exist on microfilm anywhere. So we applied for and got a grant to send off these old newspapers to be put on microfilm, and we'll be the only people who own that resource.
So, I know people that have gone to college to get the how do I take care of the Declaration of Independence kind of job.
Archives.
Yeah. And so you don't have people in-house for things that level. Mostly you would go, hey, this is special enough that we need somebody who specializes in taking care of old documents to make sure this gets preserved to the best of possible to save the information.
Correct, exactly. And that's, I have two amazing employees in that room who are very proactive about making sure that the materials are well cared for, but there are certain things that are so specialty.
Correct.
That, and
types of paper handling, chemicals, light exposure, everything.
Correct. We have a set of
humidity control, temperature control.
Well, we have a set of photographs right now that photographs over time, they degrade, they turn to vinegar, and you just lose the images. And so that's one of our next projects is we've got to find a way to preserve those images and get the originals in cold storage to stop the decomposition process, basically. So, and that's a new role for me. I never was the administrator of the local history room before.
Gotcha.
But during COVID, we had some sort of role changes. And so that then came under my umbrella. So that's been a learning curve for me.
What's the most interesting thing, not to put you on the spot, what are a few interesting things like that? Would you say those are probably the neatest things that somebody has walked in and said, and you go, oh my goodness, this is a gold mine. We need to really take good care of this and figure out a way to preserve it.
We have a lot of really, we have... I'm gonna be a bad representation of the local history room because I'm still learning what all they have. But we have something like a lock of George Washington's hair, or there's a thing that we're getting donated to us that is an original land plot map with slave owner families. That's all of the county where we live. That is so old and so rare that most libraries only have it pieces of it. It's huge, and it's helpful to be able to look at it as a whole image
and see how the whole county was laid out back in 1840 or 1850,
as opposed to having a bunch of 8.5 by 11 chunks of it that you have to kind of piece together like a puzzle on the table. So, but again, that's an expensive restoration process.
And are those things available like in a special viewing room, or do you have to wait until you figure out how to preserve those things? Like if I walked into the library and went, let me see the lock of George Washington's hair, is that something that is, or is that something that needs to be figured out to preserve it first so that it can be displayed? Or
there are different some things are you're not gonna be able to come in and put your hands on them.
Okay.
But I think for the most part, it will be the gals in that room really try to be as accommodating as possible. So it may be you can't touch it, but I'll get it out for you and let you look at it.
Right.
The map we're hoping to be displayed behind protective glass, so that way nobody's touching the original finish or anything like that. But it's still a usable piece of historic document.
That's the challenge, isn't it? To make it accessible to the public while still preserving it. It's like we could put it in this anti-acid paper and lock it away in the dark, cool room, but then what good does it do anybody?
Correct.
So unless you take a picture of it and put a picture of it up and go, hey, the real deal's back behind the wall, but you can see a rendition of it here.
Right.
So, and how long overall, when you started, when did you start in the public library?
2006.
Okay, so 17 years roughly. 17 years later, what would you say is the biggest change? Is it the technology? Is it the way the library functions and operates? Is it the people that use the library? And we'll get to that a little bit more detail in a few minutes. But what do you think the biggest change in your role has been?
I think the biggest change has been the transition of the attitude of libraries that we are not a repository for books and documents, but that we are a community space.
Okay.
So that has probably been the biggest, and that brings with it a whole host of other challenges or unique situations. But the idea that it's very much, when we built the library that I'm in right now, the library building that I'm in right now, the thought behind it was she wanted it to be, our director wanted it to be the third place. So where you are when you're not at work or home. Okay. And that community living room sort of concept is something that was not, it was like, why are you sitting here all day? You're loitering. If you're not using the materials, you need to go. That's not the culture anymore.
Okay.
And it's much more, you're welcome to be here. We want you to be here. We want you to hang out. If you need something, we're here. We'll connect you with community services. We'll point
Not a big difference from library to schools, to be honest. It's a it seems like all of our organizations were being asked to reach out to the community and become community support, almost pseudo family support
or social work.
Yeah, social work, like all of these things. It seems pretty similar to teaching, where it's like, okay, it's not just good enough to teach the kids when they come in your classroom. Now we need to call home and find out why Johnny's not in school. Now we need to reach out to guidance. Now we need to get a PPS, our pupil services workers, in there. So it sounds like the library taking a different approach. Where do you think that comes from? Does that come from the library's need to exist, or does it come from the need they see in the community?
It absolutely, everything that libraries do is a response to need that we see in the community. So in where I work, there are a lot of really great organizations that provide a lot of really great services to people. There are still people that fall through the cracks.
Right.
And those people who is going to help somebody apply for unemployment? They can't go to the unemployment office. There's not anybody there, or they're closed, and these dire things, or like you need to do your taxes. Where are you going to go to do that if you don't have internet
or if you don't have money to pay somebody?
Correct.
So you end up probably doing a lot of things that you're not compensated for that other people would get compensated for doing as a librarian.
Yes, but I think a lot of the social services, I would consider public libraries very much a social service. It's like the police now. We work closely with our local police department, and there's a different tack where it's not just we're going to immediately arrest you and take you to jail. They have all of this trauma-informed counseling and
right.
ways that they can identify, like, is this a person who needs to go to jail, or is this a person who just needs to be connected with someone that can help them with whatever trauma they're going through right now?
And we'll talk about that a little bit more in the future, because there are things that you and I have talked about before we started the podcast, about things that you might not expect to see in a public library, for good or for bad.
Yes.
And so we'll get to that in a little bit, as people might be saying, well, why do they work with the police? What's the need for that? And so I'd like to get to that in a minute here too. We talked a little bit about how you came to this career path, and that it wasn't necessarily a first choice, but that once you found your way into it, you sort of felt your niche. It was something that you were really into. Is it typical, going back to your college for a second, what degree path would somebody follow if they wanted to become a librarian? Is English a typical first degree to get? Does it matter, or what do you recommend?
Absolutely does not matter. And actually, naturally, a lot of people who are bookish and enjoy reading, if they get a bachelor's degree in English, librarianship certainly is a natural pathway.
Okay.
But what I find very valuable, like I have someone on my staff who has a bachelor's degree in biology. I have someone on my staff who has a master's degree in film studies. And
they bring their specialized knowledge.
Yes.
So if somebody comes in and they're like, hey, I'm studying for my medical whatever, or I have a question I've been learning about the anatomy, and you go, you know what, Bob would be your guy because he's got a degree in biology. So Bob can bring his expertise in biology into resource finding for people that are asking about that.
Correct. And that is what makes a really vibrant team, I think, is having people from broad backgrounds. I have somebody who does YouTube videos about cats on my team. I have somebody who I'm lucky enough to have a transgender employee who brings a totally different perspective to, the services that we provide. I have somebody who's a former chef who ran a catering business and a nonprofit. And that is so valuable to have such broad backgrounds coming to a public library.
Like, for example, you have somebody that wants to start a podcast business. They could come in and talk, hey, here are some business things, business licenses. There's somebody who has some expertise. Perhaps I should come speak with them. In any case, as we move on, what was the interview process like for the position you have now? What kinds of things do you have to be able to do to be a librarian, or to work with the public, or...
The position I have now, it was very interesting. I kind of naturally fell into it because the woman who hired me applied for and was promoted to a different position. So for several months, we did not have a supervisor of the department. So
Which is your job, your position now?
that's is supervising the information services
So
department.
she was here, you were here, she moved up, and the gap was still there.
Correct. Yes. And so myself and another librarian kind of ran the department for a couple of months.
De facto, even without an official supervisor.
Correct. And then we had another sort of interim supervisor who didn't last terribly long, and then there was another huge gap of we have this gap of no supervisor, and who's in charge if there's no supervisor.
Why the gap? Is it delay of like process, or is there a shortage of people who do what you do? Is it hard to find librarians?
It's not hard to find them. It is hard to find master's degree librarian jobs.
Okay.
So, and especially because, unfortunately, I think the degree is getting devalued a little bit because due to funding crises and, various challenges that libraries face, I have paraprofessionals on my team. These are people who have bachelor's degrees but no master's degrees. They are perfectly capable of working that public service desk and providing amazing service. Do they have the higher level theoretical, why libraries do what they do? Here's how we need to guide programming. Here's how we build a strategic plan. No, but it is cheaper to employ a paraprofessional than it is to employ a professional.
Right.
So the librarian one jobs, entry-level librarian positions are getting increasingly difficult to find.
Okay.
But paraprofessional jobs that just require a bachelor's degree are becoming easier to find.
So it's getting watered down almost by the lack of education of the people coming in, or because of the lack of positions that are being offered?
It's the lack of positions that are being offered. I don't think there is any shortage of people who are still going to library school.
Okay.
And in a certain way, I mean, I could probably still do my job without a master's degree because I had the practical experience of working there for so long, of running the department in the absence of a supervisor. But it definitely makes me more aware of those core values, those core concepts that I think are really
You're seeing
vital.
the bigger picture.
Yes.
So in addition to just answering a question, you're answering a question in the ideal aspects of your head of why am I answering the question and how to guide, teaching them the fish rather than just fishing for them kind of a thing.
Correct.
That's cool. How did you progress through the company? We talked about it a little bit. Like you started off just as a part-time worker, and then gradually you've moved through and up in different ways, and it's restructured some.
Yes.
So talk a little bit about like, okay, when you first started, this was all I did, and then I learned this, and we know where you are now. So we know where you are now as an administrator, and we talked a little bit about all the jobs that you have now. But where did you start in the company? How did you work your way up to where you are now?
Well, when I first was hired, I was hired as what's known as a Library Associate 1, which is a paraprofessional position. So I had my bachelor's degree, and my sole job was to work 20 hours a week on the desk, helping people. So 100% public facing. After about 3 years of not having health insurance, my boss very kindly started cross-training me in other departments. And one of those departments was interlibrary loan, which is the system in the state of Maryland through which you can basically check out a book from any library in the state of Maryland, and we have a whole courier system, so books get shipped all around the state.
Gotcha. So let's say I want a book on the history of archaeology in Egypt, and it's available, but it's only available in a Baltimore library or in a Garrett County library in Maryland, one side of the state to the other. No matter where I am in the state, the library system has a way to get that book to me in my local library.
That's exactly it. So for the next 5 years, I split my time between doing 20 hours a week on the public service desk and 20 hours a week working in the interlibrary loan department, processing books through, because we are a lender and a receiver.
Gotcha.
So we lend out our materials and we get materials in for our patrons. After that, is when I went for my master's degree. And that was an exhausting process because I was working full time
Right.
and commuting to College Park from Falling Waters, West Virginia, and doing a full course load, which is what the scholarship required.
Right.
I was very lucky because very shortly after, I think 3 months after I graduated with my master's degree, a master's degree position opened in my department.
Perfect.
Yes. And usually that never, once somebody gets into full time, it's really, there was a series of transitions where one person got a job in another county, another person who was a librarian moved up, and then I was able to bump up into the librarian.
Gotcha. So timing was everything.
Absolutely.
As it often is in life.
Absolutely.
Very good. Do you get to participate in career training opportunities, conferences, trainings? Like, how do librarians get more training once they're on the job?
Yeah, there is more training than any one person could possibly complete available. And I don't know if this is unique to libraries, but as lifelong learners, there are opportunity after opportunity after opportunities that we have to either do virtual trainings, whether we're doing webinars, whether we are doing online seminars, whether we're driving in person. There's a lot of continuing education opportunities within the state. And even my library system, I mean, they've sent me to Florida for a conference. They've sent me to Georgia for a conference.
I'm just imagining conferences of librarians. There are people sitting around telling each other to be quiet and playing Scrabble.
No, actually.
Are librarians, what kind of people are librarians?
They're changing, and in a very fun way. I think 96% of the people that work in my department have tattoos.
Okay.
Or colored hair, or piercings, or...
So it's becoming more bohemian, artistic, whatever the word.
We're very... you'll hear the phrase, not all heroes wear capes, thrown around a lot.
Okay.
We're these like social justice warriors and, and anti-censorship and, the freedom of people to access whatever information they want to access. Right. And so the younger generations coming in are bringing some really great enthusiasm and diversity. It used to be all like little old ladies with white hair, and it is
holding
not
their
that
tea with their pinky out.
Right, it is not
Scrabble
that anymore. So yeah, conferences, we do a lot of the going and learning and sharing ideas. Librarians are very good about sharing. So there's no like, I'm going to steal that idea from them. It's like, sure, I'll tell you exactly how I did it. And so you can recreate it in your county. So we do all of that stuff, but there is definitely a lot of drinking, a lot of pub quizzes. We love trivia, Cards Against Humanity. When you work, particularly if you work in a more, well, I suppose this holds true for any branch, but there is a certain level of nothing shocks you anymore that happens when you work in a public library.
Like a police officer sense of humor. Like once you've seen people at their best and worst, there's really not much off the chart.
That's exactly correct. And librarians are shockingly funny. Like, they are really hilarious people, and they're usually very well educated people, which means that, you're not getting potty humor jokes. You're getting really cerebral humor, and sometimes not, but we also just are we've seen everything.
Just look all the way back to Robert Preston in The Music Man. The only one in town that knew he was faking was Marion the librarian. And he had to really woo her.
I know.
To win her over.
That's another trope, is the sexy librarian.
Right.
She's wearing the bun, and all of a sudden she takes her hair down and takes her glasses off. And so there's a lot of, too, especially when I'm old meat now. I've been there long enough, but especially when I first got hired, it's for young women in particular, it can be, I guess this is with any public service, you're sort of like, I had one guy, one of my favorite things was he came up and he was like, "Oh, how are you doing today?" And I'm like, "Oh, I'm fine, thank you." And he goes, "So, are you married?" And I lied and I was like, "Oh, yeah, And he just goes, "Happily?" I was like,
yeah, typical. Well, I mean, you're there. You're a captive audience.
Yes.
He knows, or she knows, like whoever comes in, like, okay, they're here. You kind of, they're at the advantage because you are there and you have to portray this image of being a librarian, what you are. But they can be themselves. They can be irreverent, and then so that leads me to some other things that I wanted to get to, because if I were to walk in, or if the average person were to walk into your library, what would they see that surprises them as far as services offered? Like, I know I learned recently that libraries will do passports. I don't know if people know that. I didn't.
A lot of libraries in the state of Maryland do. We are a passport acceptance facility, so that is another one of my jobs that I do for the library. Is people come in and I sit down, I take their photo, I go through their passport application, make sure all of their documents are in order. That's just another part of it's not only good for libraries to be able to provide that service, because we typically have very high attention to detail. We're, good with things like that, but it's also a revenue stream. It's an alternate revenue stream for the library system. So
that's something that the public pays out of pocket for when they come in for that particular service.
Correct.
Whereas most of your services are free.
Correct. And that's just because we're just functioning as agents of the federal government.
Understood.
But for our service of, and the government sets this rate, for our service of taking the picture and going through the paperwork, we get a nominal execution fee.
Right.
And the rest of the money goes to the state.
And you mentioned classes like internet classes, and that's literally something on a Tuesday or Wednesday evening from 6 to 7 or 6 to 8. You might see a room of 25 people with a librarian teaching them how to use Gmail, or teaching them how to, whatever the case may be, access even your own library online so that they can surf, instead of going to the card catalog like we used to. And now they can just type it into their search browser for your library. When they log in, they create accounts and they can request books, hold books, and all that, all online.
Absolutely. And the other thing that I think is an advertised resource that we have is we do pay for a lot of databases, and databases are unique because the information is vetted. There's often information that you can't get for free elsewhere online because it's behind a paywall that we pay for. So one of the prime, most popular examples is Ancestry. Ancestry.com, for people who are tracing their family genealogies. We pay for a subscription to that so that any member of our library can access it.
Okay.
So
when you're looking for things that are resources, it's always a good idea to check with your local library to say, like, hey, does the library have any inside access to this that I can use for free through my free public library membership, or, library card, or whatever your account is with your public library.
Correct. And one other thing that I'll mention, because I'm assuming probably a majority of our listeners, or your listeners, are in the state of Maryland.
Both of them.
Both of them.
Well, we're just getting started. It'll be millions later on.
Yes. But if you have an address, if you live in the state of Maryland, you can get a library card from any library system in the state.
Okay.
You don't have to be local to that county.
Okay.
So I could go down and get well, I couldn't because I live in West Virginia, but if you're a Maryland resident, you could go get a library card from Pratt, and then they are a much wealthier library system than we are, so you would have access to even more resources.
Yeah. Very good. And you mentioned children's literacy earlier, and I think you and I might have talked about this off the camera. Story times, like you might walk in and see a librarian reading a book to moms and 2-year-olds, or things like that, or book wars. Can you talk a little bit about what those things are?
Yeah, we have a program that's been running for, I think, 35 years at our library, which is we call it Battle of the Books. That's our name of it, where students can create teams, and they have to read certain number of books, and then they come in and they have this battle where they have to answer trivia questions about the contents of the books. We also partner with the local library system. So any student in the county in the county school system automatically has a library card, and it is their student ID number.
Oh, very good.
So they don't have to go through the process of having a parent come in, getting the parent to sign them up for a library card. They can just come in, and whatever their lunch number is, or whatever their student ID number is, that is their library card number. So they have access.
So all public school students, at least in the county where you are automatically have a library access.
Correct.
Do you find, we'll get to this later, are there a lot of students that come in unaccompanied.
Yes. In my particular, we have two branches where I feel like that's maybe three, pretty common. Two of them are near schools.
Okay.
And so like after school, they get hit with a lot of kids. Where I am is more urban. And sadly, we have a lot of kids in our area who don't have a great home life, or they go home and their parents say, get out of my hair. I don't want to see you. Come back at dinner time.
So the library becomes not just a place of learning, but a hangout.
Yes.
Does that cause issues sometimes?
Yeah, it absolutely does. And we have, but it's also, again, moving toward that community center
right.
sort of feel.
So kind of like not how do we kick these kids out, but okay, we know they're coming. What can we have available for them to make it not they're all hanging out in the back laughing and talking too loud, but to make it something like, we know they're coming, so what can we have that they'll actually be into?
Yes, how do we engage them?
Right.
And a lot of times that's computers. We have, in our teen department, we have 4 brand new gaming computers.
Oh, wow.
So they can come in and log into their Steam or their whatever and play video games online. We have high-speed internet, so that's a really popular thing.
I would think that would be extremely popular.
Yes. Yeah, so we really try and meet them where they are. And the same goes for adults as well, not just children and teens. But we have, for example, one of the things that we've been experimenting with is something called passive programming. So we have all of these people who are regularly in our building. Like every day you see the same faces. They come in, they use the computers, they sit, they read, they do whatever it is they're going to do. They use our Wi-Fi. And then we're doing these programs where we don't have to be physically present, like teaching a class.
Right. Yeah, it's like an individualized learning plan.
Yeah, but there are engagement experiences that they can have. So it'll be, I did one on a display on the Mandela effect, where I had pictures of like, is it the Berenstain Bears or is it the Berenstein Bears? If you're not familiar with the Mandela effect, it's fascinating, and look it up. And then had people like fill out a quiz, and whoever got the most right got a $10 gift card to Sheets or something like that, just to get them interacting and to give them positive activities to do while they're in the building if they are going to be there.
Right. And you win them over, and then eventually they go like, oh, hey, they got this cool thing over here. I came in for X, but they've also got Y, and that's pretty interesting. And the next thing you know, you may have them, like we talk about teaching unintentional learning. Like they're learning, they didn't really come in to learn, but because there's something that caught their attention, now you've got them utilizing the library's resources for good and not for evil.
Yes.
Not just a place to get out of. Yeah, you mentioned free internet access and the technology classes and the book wars and all that. I didn't know about the entertainment part that you mentioned. So talk a little bit about like what kinds of just entertainment.
Yeah, well, a lot of times, particularly when we're in more of a recession time, like right now, entertainment is so critical. But say, for instance, you don't have internet, you can't sit at home and watch YouTube videos. The movies are crazy expensive, and there's, what are you going to walk around the mall, but you can't buy anything if you don't have a ton of expendable income.
Right.
So, you can check out DVDs, you can check out CDs, along with the books and audiobooks. We have, like I said, streaming services online. If you want like graphic novels, we have them in print and we have them online. We have a regular movie afternoon that we do where we stream like blockbuster box office movies.
Gotcha.
We have a license to show them publicly. So we have a popcorn machine and we make popcorn and we have
all
a
at your
movie.
local library.
Yep, and you can just come in and sit down and have some popcorn and watch a movie.
That's crazy.
Yeah, and the concert series is another one that's very popular, is having Sunday concerts where we bring in local musicians and you can just come enjoy a free concert on a Sunday afternoon.
All things I don't think people would think of at their local library. And I think probably part of the problem of libraries that they have to overcome is getting the information to think of you as differently than the library of 30 years ago. Like we don't just have walls of books and where you have to, I remember going to the library when I was in high school, to the library in Frederick County, Maryland, the main library right downtown. And it was literally just a warehouse of books. It was unappealing. I mean, if you're a book lover, I'm sure it's wonderful. But for me, not being a reader specifically, I was going there for research. There was nothing fancy, no pretty colors, no pretty pictures. It was literally a giant warehouse with narrow aisles and tall shelves, and you felt like you were just in a catalog, you know. So, and that's not the way libraries are now, and especially not where you work and a lot of other ones. Like you say, they're designing them to be warmer places, more people friendly, more. And because of that, the services are changing, and so a lot of these things I don't think people actually consider as like, oh, I can go to the library and hear a guitar player. I can go to the library and hear a vocalist or a harp player, or, you're probably not going to see Van Halen at your local library,
No.
but for local music and just a place to sit down and relax and spend time with family, what a wonderful place. And earlier we talked about the lawyer in the library, like all these other things that I would have never thought of as, I need to speak with an attorney about some civil advice. Well, let's go to the library.
Right. And I think, too, this is part of the challenge of libraries as well, is we're not very good at tooting our own horn. We're not very good at saying, hey, man, we are so awesome. You
Right.
got to come in. And so that is one of the biggest challenges is we can engage the people that are in the building, but how do we get to the people that aren't coming into the building, that don't know?
Yeah.
How do we get to them? So we're having a huge event in December that's like a fantasy dress ball where people can come. Now, this is a fundraising event, so they can buy tickets, but they're having games and henna tattoos and music and a bar and, and all kinds of activities that are library and literary themed.
Gotcha.
And so
Again, not your grandfather's library.
correct. So
What are the most common, let's talk about some of the funnier things that you might deal with. What are the most common questions people ask you? Earlier you said, are you a volunteer? Or what are some of the other, and I mentioned, I think it's a book, it's blue, it's, meanwhile you're dealing with, how many books would you guess if you had to? Is there any number that you have your finger on for your branch of the library?
I used to know this. I think for
It's got to be hundreds of thousands, right?
Yeah, I think for my branch, it's somewhere around 350,000.
So they come in and go, I need a blue book. And you go, okay, that narrows it down to 48,000.
Right, exactly.
Right. So, what are some other funny things that you get when they come in and they go, excuse me, do you have any books on flatulence, excessive? I mean, there's got to be funny topics that people kind of shield their face when they ask you, or things that are just, as a librarian, where you just have a hard time keeping a straight face.
Well, absolutely. And I'll share some of my favorite sort of random questions that I've received. One of my favorite things to do is reader's advisory, which is, I loved this book. What do I read next?
Okay.
And just having that conversation with people.
So it's kind of like on Netflix with because you've watched
Right.
this, here are some suggested titles.
Exactly. And I remember a guy came in and he's like, I'm looking about a book about that girl with the face. And I was like, right.
As opposed to the book about the girl without
the face. Exactly.
The girl with the... Okay, would I ever guess this?
I don't know. You can try.
The girl with a face. Was it the Charla Nash, the woman that had the monkey that attacked her and had to have her face...
This is a fiction book.
Oh, it's a fiction book. The girl with the face. I don't read enough books to know.
And historical fiction. I'll say it that way.
The girl with the face. I have no idea what that would be.
Well, and I was like, well, do you remember the author's name? Do you remember the name of the girl with the face? Did you read anything else?
What was the point of the girl without the face?
Right, like could remember nothing, not the plot, not anything about it, not the author's name. And so when I asked, well, have you ever read anything else by this same author? Do you remember anything about their other books? And they said, yeah, they wrote another one about the two people in Egypt. And I was like, okay. And so my brain started, we're getting somewhere. So the girl with the face and the two people in Egypt.
Okay.
So from there I said, do you mean Antony and Cleopatra? And he was like, yes. And so after like a half an hour of searching and Googling, we found the book about Antony and Cleopatra. So we found the author. And he had also written a book about Helen of Troy, the woman whose face launched 1,000 ships.
Okay.
So the girl with the face.
So the girl with the face was Helen of Troy.
Yes. She's the only one.
Yes. It's like the girl with the face. Christy Brinkley.
Right. Yeah,
I don't know. I don't know how to get there from here.
Right. There's a lot of that.
That's funny.
There's it's in the same line with the I don't remember the title, but the cover was blue.
Yeah. Well, the girl with that's a perfect example of how you have to go from 0 and get to 100. Now, how long would that process take?
Well, that one took me maybe like 35 minutes,
That
which
seems not bad.
No, but I particularly love doing that.
Yes.
Like that is like a fun scavenger hunt for me. So I'm like, I'm going to find it.
It's a detective puzzle.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, of course.
So that is one of my favorite things to do. So it might I might be slightly more quick at it than others might be, because a lot of people panic when they're asked that question.
Of course.
Like, I don't know what...
But you have to have a fairly big breadth of knowledge to be able to do that. The girl with the face, the two people in Egypt. Like, what if you didn't know Antony and Cleopatra? Then you would have been no farther ahead.
Right.
Like, it relies on you being an informed person enough to at least make some connections.
Yeah.
Some general connections. The two people in Egypt, I don't know if I would have thought of Anthony and I'd have been like, King Tut, like Egypt. I don't know who's in ISIS. Like, I don't mean ISIS, I mean the god, not the people. But like, who's in Egypt? Like, I don't know who's in Egypt, you know?
Oh, those two people.
Was it Moses in Egypt when he, let my people go? That was it's like, who was in Egypt? So
yeah,
that's funny. So any other things that you can think of as far as what people ask for that just, you have to, okay, and? Well,
there's a lot of, one of the things that's more challenging is, and one of the customer service aspects of this job is, you don't argue with a customer's belief structure.
Okay, fair.
So they come in and they're like, I want this book about this topic, and it is absolute horse crap.
Right.
And you're like, why are you looking for
So that's a more frustrating aspect.
Yes.
Like, I need this book to talk about why certain water is poison. And you're like, I know that book, it's been disproven 1,000 times. And you want to educate with what we believe. Let's give them all the best of it with what we believe is factual information rather than what has been shown to be disproven.
Correct. And
so, like, for example, I'll give this example. Years ago when autism, has really started to pop out, people thought, there's the flu vaccine has thimerosal, and thimerosal, is like mercury. It has mercury in it, and that could be causing it. And there was this doctor in England that came out with all these studies saying, it's the thimerosal in this preservative in the shot vaccine that, and so millions of people went out and realized it until it came later that was disproven many times that it wasn't the thimerosal. But yet there's somebody in there that wants to believe, almost a la conspiracy theory,
yes,
that, I need a book on thimerosal and why it poisons people and gives them autism. And you're like, but it's been proven that it doesn't, but you're there to serve, to educate, but not to change or argue with their mantra.
Right, exactly. It's like we're there to provide what they're looking for. And the best you can maybe do is say, here's our section of books about vaccine facts.
Right.
So maybe...
And hope that maybe as they're browsing, they don't just seek the information that confirms their position. Correct. They seek objective information.
Yes.
Yeah, that would be frustrating too, because you go, gosh, I know that this is... And it's not even what you believe, because you would not... I would hope librarians, generally speaking, don't try to convince people to believe what they believe, but that they go, just read the objective data.
Correct.
And then make a decision for yourself. But still, it's hard, especially when you know something is not accurate or is specific misinformation, and people get a hold of it in their echo chambers on Facebook, and they go, well, this is what all my friends believe, so I believe it. And you're like, but the data clearly shows that chewing gum does not cause foot cancer. It's like, okay, but it's hard to walk the line between providing information that you believed to be false or has been proven to be false to somebody because it supports what they believe.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and a lot of times too, it's not necessarily because the books that we purchase are vetted. So we try not to purchase anything in our collection that does not have some intrinsic value to it.
Right.
So it happens a lot more with like internet resources. So
Understood.
they want you to look up a topic on how orange juice cures cancer. And you're like, okay.
Yeah. Put out by the Big Orange Corporation.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Put out by Florida Citrus Growers of America.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like, well, you can find studies. That's one thing I mentioned earlier in the master's degree. You can find studies that say anything because the people that fund them bias those studies to produce results that support their position.
Yes.
So what do you think is the most commonly missed service at the library? If you had to say, my gosh, if I could tell people one thing we offer that nobody ever takes advantage of, and it's a great resource, and it could be something we've already mentioned, but is there something that you think just in general, the public, man, if only the public knew we offered this, we'd probably have 1,000 more visitors a month? Or people come in every day and they don't know we have this, and we have to educate them on the fact that we offer this service. Is there a common? It might be a tough question.
That is a tricky question. This might be an unsatisfying answer, but I think that the thing that I wish people knew was that, yes, you can Google anything, but the chances of you having enough information literacy to find the right result is so much more difficult than you may think. Like that's the biggest thing that we fight is like we're old-fashioned Google. But it's so different from that. And I wish people would recognize that a little bit more.
So along the lines of, well, I have Google, why do I need a librarian?
Correct.
But like you said earlier, you focus the information and you hone the information so that instead of what might take you an hour to sift through and get to on the internet, you can direct people in a more time-sensitive way. Like, I already know because I've had 1 million people come in and ask me about the political election of 2020. So I already know what resources are there. So I can help you instead of you wading through the haystack to find the needle. I've got the needle right here. I can direct you right to where the needle is.
I think
so. Time saving, really.
Time saving and accuracy of information, and I think some of the more fun things I wish people knew more about.
Yeah.
Like
well, we're doing that today because a lot of those things I doubt people even consider happened in the library.
No, even our father was like, why the hell do I need a library?
Right. Are there things that the library doesn't offer? I mean, what are some thoughts that you've had without stepping on your toes as far as your employers, but are there things where you've gone, man, I really think the library is behind this. I really think we need to develop this. And what stops you? Presumably it's money, but what stops you from offering those services?
That's usually the answer of why something isn't happening is money. There are a couple of things that some of the things that I talked about before that some of the larger library systems own, but that I think, fingers crossed, might be coming in our future. Yeah. So one of the things that's going to be upcoming is we are going to start circulating hotspots for people to check out. So if they don't have internet access, they can come in, check out a hotspot for 2 weeks, and we pay for all of the data and all of the everything, and they have the use of the hotspot. So for individuals who don't have internet connectivity at home, or are traveling or whatever.
Do you know what the percentage is in your county of people with unreliable or not high speed? Like, it's an unfair question, but I just wonder if that's a big issue in that area or not.
It is in different parts of our county. Okay. So like the two places where there is the most disparity would be places outlying and urban.
Well, because you have a city, but you also have a lot of country in our county, in the county, and people that don't have it. Do you feel like the library? This just popped into my head. Do you feel like the library is growing or shrinking as a resource? Like, do you feel like it's gain, like, wow, we're on the upswing, or like, oh my gosh, we're on the downslope?
It's hard to say because we're in a very weird, we're still in this post-COVID recovery period where no one was coming into our buildings, and We have not, in my particular system, we have not recovered from that yet.
And what did that, sorry to interrupt, what did that look like? Because I didn't even touch on that in our conversation. What did the library look like during COVID?
It was curbside pickups, so people could still get materials. So you call in, you place your order for your materials. We put them in a bag, we run them out, we set it on a table.
So nobody was in the building?
Nobody was in the, so, I mean, staff were.
Gotcha.
But,
right. But I meant as far as patrons.
Yeah, and it became, at first, and then it became, like my department, we were doing online programming. So we had like an adult story time where somebody would read from a classic novel and people could tune in to watch, or doing online classes or book chats, or, golly, I don't even remember all this stuff. But we had to so drastically pivot from all in person to all online.
Right.
And that was really challenging. We had to figure out a way that we could answer telephones from home.
Gotcha.
Because we were all working from home for a little while. So picking up phones that VP'd into our houses and answering reference questions.
Right.
And then the gradual reopening, it was like limited number of people in the building, and mostly
plexiglass dividers and all the tables. And,
correct. Yeah. And a matter of, we are now a very task-based place to be. So you come in, you use the computer, you go. You don't hang out all day long.
Was then, or it is now?
It was in that middle ground
Gotcha.
of COVID, where it was like there were limited people. We didn't want people just hanging in the space for hours and hours and hours at a time.
And the other thing that I just thought of when you were talking about that is there are meeting rooms and rooms there too. So if there's a local group that, hey, we need a good place to get together and meet, it doesn't have to be at the Green Turtle with music. Like, they can come in and rent a room, or not rent, but reserve a room in the library for, say, a Dungeons and Dragons game.
Absolutely.
or a meeting of local, musicians that want to talk about putting on a concert or whatever.
Or like we see our local literacy council come in all the time and do tutoring sessions with people.
Okay.
Or if you...
Like literally teaching them to read better.
Yeah.
Okay.
Or if you need... we get a lot of people that are coming in and they have to do like a Skype interview
and
for
they need
a job.
a private, quiet space with good internet.
Exactly. Right. Or people who are...
So sometimes just the space.
Yeah.
So could I, if I wanted to, haul my gear in and do a podcast from the library?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
so
you
anything.
could book a study room and do that, or we do have larger rooms available, and those are fee-based, but it's like...
nominal, just to make sure that there's a point in somebody reserving
Correct. So, but no, we have, and not every branch has that.
Right.
The Central Library, we were blessed with the most amount of space.
And what types of people do you see in the library primarily? Do you see all, maybe you think of people who go to the library as already educated people who just need, some help doing deep research on. I mean, it's not just all gentlemen in blazers with elbow patches and ties on. Like, what would you say are the most common patrons of your library, or is it not a common? Is there no common?
I don't know that there is a common. There are common groups that we see, and I can talk about one of our challenges right now as well in discussing this. So I'll speak for my branch in particular. Lots of families with children.
And I don't want to interrupt. We're purposely not discussing specific branches today. So it's not like if people are sitting at home going, why aren't they mentioning? We chose to do that just not to protect you so much, but to allow you to be able to speak to generalities, because it's really not relevant what branch you work at specifically, because this is the same thing you're going to see in any county public library system. So we kind of wanted to just keep it generic like that, also just to protect the privacy of you and the people that work with you and the patrons of your establishment and all that. So we're purposely obfuscating, if that's the right word.
Yes.
The specifics, because it's really irrelevant. This is going to happen in any public library.
Yes, it's absolutely. And speaking of which, I would encourage anybody that's listening to check out a movie called The Public. It's got Paul Giamatti in it. It was directed by Emilio Estevez, and it's all about the Central Library and Chicago public libraries and the experiences that the librarians there went through during
Nonfiction? It's based on true stories?
It's based on
Okay.
the Chicago Public Library.
Okay.
So, but I mean, it's a fictionalized series
Okay.
of events, but
Based on real situations.
it is one of the truest depictions of urban librarianship I have ever seen in my
Interesting.
life.
I've never heard of it.
Yeah.
But two big stars are involved with it. So
Yeah.
do you know what motivated them to do this movie? Or
I used to know that. I don't remember anymore. It was something with Emilio Estevez.
how long ago?
Maybe 5 or 6 years. So it's not terribly old.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's interesting. I've not heard the title before. So
But no, I mean, in my location, we see a variety. We have families with kids come in, obviously. That's sort of libraries tend to be bread and butter with the kids programming. That's a big part of it. And even I remember, I mean, if I think back on my history with libraries, Mom would take me to our central library locally every week, and I'd get a big stack of books, and we'd go to story time, and then I'd take my books home and read them, and it was always an exciting trip to go.
Right.
Did I go when I was in middle and high school? Not
not to a public library, right?
I went to my school library. Then once I was in college, I went to my college library.
Right.
So the kids really bring in the family programming.
Gotcha.
And it's for socialization as well. So like all of those poor COVID babies who never saw another
Isolated.
child.
Yeah.
We have a large Mennonite population that uses our library.
Okay.
We do see the individuals experiencing homelessness.
Okay.
Because there are a lot of public services available in the city where I work. We establish good relationships with them.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we know them by name, and that's something that there's no other place that these people can go hang out.
And get respect as an individual. And also, I mean, let's not forget basics like they can get in and out of the weather.
Right.
Hot, cold, rain, snow. They can be treated with respect. They can have a comfortable chair to sit in. If there's someone that spends their nights in a shelter or spends their nights in one of the local facilities for people that are homeless, they can come in and use the library and be in there most of the day. And now I'm sure not just to blame it on that, but with all of the anytime, unlike a school where only students are allowed in, when you can allow anyone in the public to come in, and I'm not categorizing just homeless people, but drug users, homeless people, with the good, you must get the bad.
Absolutely. And the opioid epidemic has been particularly challenging. That's one of the biggest changes that I have seen since I started. So when I started, you'd every once in a while have the stereotypical, hobo-looking guy sitting in the corner with the brown paper bag trying to sneak a nip on the bottle. And now it's, we're having people experiencing overdoses
Well, we talked earlier we would come back to this, about why you have such a close working relationship with the local police department. But there are times where you found people, not just you collectively, but you personally, have found people that have overdosed in a bathroom or have, I mean, you can tell a million stories about times when, wow, this is way beyond what a librarian is. Nobody would ever think that a librarian would be to help revive someone with Narcan.
Right.
But yet because you have anyone in the public allowed in your building, you're trying to be that community center, whatever's in the community comes into your building.
Well, and that's the other thing too, is, I mean, the broad variety of people we see who have a mental illness is another large challenge. And a lot of times there are correlations. It's not causative, but
right.
A lot of times homelessness and addiction go together, or
right.
mental illness and addiction go together. And
right.
so we're seeing these people on some of the worst days of their lives and really trying to, that's the reason I use the phrase individuals experiencing homelessness, mm-hmm. because it's an attempt to not define them by their housing situation.
Right, right.
They're people who are going through things that may need help, and we're a safe space.
Right.
So, but I will admit, keeping the balance between, do I want a family with children to walk into the bathroom and find somebody passed out on the floor?
Right.
No, I really don't want that.
And how does the library handle that? Like, how do you try to strike that balance? Do you, when you have something like that, I mean, you're obviously not necessarily interested in narking on every single person that comes in, but you also need to do what's best for you and what's best for the general public using your facility. So that must be a very delicate balance of, you know, I don't want to get this person arrested, but I also can't have them shooting up heroin in the bathroom.
Correct. And that's what we're working on right now. And this has been sort of a sea change in the approach to security in public libraries, which they have a public library securities conference every year. I mean, like, it's a hot topic. We are not...
Because you're not restricting
we're not
access.
unique. Well, I mean, we are... God, this is the most horrible thing, but I mean, we've done active shooter trainings.
Yeah.
We have done, I mean, it's the same thing with schools where it's like, I didn't sign up for this.
Yeah.
I didn't think that this was going to be the reality. And it's not the reality all the time.
Correct. But it's something that unfortunately we all have to prepare for in today's world.
Yes.
You know, even when talking with Art Tom in our first episode about, you know, gun safety and all, and he was talking about I asked him about whether to arm teachers, you know, and it's like, have we come to the point where we just have to arm all of the good guys? You know, do we want armed librarians to protect, you know, and while you don't necessarily have the angry teen exclusively, unfortunately, these young men who regularly are the ones who are committing these, you know, acts of aggression and violence. But that's part of your population, certainly. That same kid that goes to school and has a bad day or got dropped by his girlfriend or his mom and dad are getting a divorce or he's mentally disturbed or medically, you know, maybe addicted, he's coming into the library too, or she's coming into the library too. And so it's a common person that we all have to deal with. The police have to deal with them on the street. You have to deal with them in the library. I have to deal with them in the classroom. And so being part of the community means that we have all of the same challenges that we share.
Yeah.
So that same person that might get picked up for shoplifting is coming into the library, is coming into the classroom. And so the more we work together, which is a good partnership to have, it's not just we have police here to crack skulls, but we have police here to, all right, let's figure out how we can compassionately help this person, not just throw them in the clink, but, you know, what can we do? How can we help this person rather than, because if it's a community center, you're going to see it.
Yeah. Well, and that's one of the things that we're doing now that is a different tack, whereas before it was like, you did it, get out, don't come back for a year. And we're trying to move away from that to more restorative practices. Gotcha. So
that's a trend in schools too.
Yeah, like
the restorative justice.
We want to establish and cultivate good relationships with these people and try and help you get to the resources that you need to help you, instead of just immediately saying, get out of my building.
Right.
Because especially, I mean, with adults too, and particularly with some of our mentally ill folks, it is not always, we don't want to throw kids out onto the street if they don't have another place to be. Like, that's a scary thing. And some of these kids are, you know, 8, 9 years old that are coming in the building unattended.
And would you rather, I mean, I think it was Dr. Ben Carson, the one that ran for president, who grew up in Detroit, if I'm not incorrect, inner city Detroit. And he's now a neurosurgeon, a pediatric neurosurgeon. You know, a brain surgeon on children. And he talked about, you know, when he ran for president years ago, he talked about the thing that kept him out of gangs and kept him out of prison and kept him off drugs was the library. And he said, my grandmother got me I think it was his grandmother, got him a library card. And so after school, he went to the library and he wasn't on the streets and he didn't. So if you kick the kids out of a safe space, a place where they can come in and learn and be surrounded by a more positive influence, they're going to seek out a gang, or they're going to seek out friends that are up to no good, or they're going to seek out the troubles that will befall them on the streets.
Yeah.
And so, you know, you don't, like you say, you don't want to just kick them to the curb, because then you're not doing, what would you say would be the most surprising thing? I mean, that would be pretty surprising to me if I walked into the bathroom and saw someone with a needle next to him. But are there other surprising things, either good or bad, that you might see at a library that do you have much in the way of fights or violence?
Oh, I was there once when probably the worst fight I ever saw is one guy, got in a fight over a girl, and one guy punched the other guy in the face, broke his nose, and then the guy with the broken nose took the other guy and shoved his head through a wall, put a big old hole in our. That is very unusual.
Okay.
Like the more typical thing and honestly, I don't see that much behavior problem usually.
I was going to say, I've been in your library, and to speak, it's a very pleasant building. It's a beautiful building. It's a pleasant place to be. The layout, while it's not an efficient use of space, but it's a beautiful building. They went for aesthetics over complete efficiency. And that doesn't mean that the building's not designed well. It's just they chose knowingly to give up some space for some beauty of architecture.
Yes.
So it is a beautiful building. And every time I've been there, it's been nothing but pleasant.
Yeah.
The times that I've come to visit you, or the times that I stop by or bring my children over for something. So I don't want to give anybody the idea that public libraries are a dangerous place.
No.
It's much safer than most other places. But still, the real world creeps in.
And it's one of the few places where people tend to respect the library. So nobody comes in there. I mean, like maybe 1% of the population comes in there wanting to be a jerk. But usually it's just people who are having a rough time, and, they
just hit their low spot while they're sitting there.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I mean, it's like church, school, library, places that are inherently for them. And by them, I mean the public, all public. There's still, in our diminishing levels of respect society that we seem to be, as levels of respect seem to be diminishing, there's still certain bastions that people look at and go like, oh, dude, it's a library.
Right.
Like it's not a place to be inappropriate, or it's a church. It's not a place to, not that some people can't be inappropriate anywhere, but there's still a certain level of, dude, it's school. You don't do that at school. Like there's an inherent belief system that we still have in this country that's like, this is an off-limits place for bad behavior, generally speaking.
And it's interesting because it's one of the quasi-governmental organizations that people still trust.
Right.
Like people are like, oh, I don't trust the government. And we're not technically government,
correct.
But it's one.
They still trust you to be objective and to be like, what skin would you have in the game to lie to them?
Right. It's like they'll come and they'll ask very personal questions about like their health issues. I mean, like you joked about flatulence, but I mean, we have people who come in and they just got a cancer diagnosis from their doctor, and they're like, I don't even know
scared.
What this means. What's the next step forward? Do you have, and from there it can be, we have books about it, or here's an article, or
that's heartbreaking, really, that they don't, because really you're not a medical professional. So part of your spiel has to be, but I'm not a doctor.
I'm not talk to your doctor about it, but here's the information I can give you.
But it's a shame that maybe you fill in, I just thought of it this way. You probably fill in for all of the gaps in every other institution, because when people, whether it's car insurance or whether it's, Toyota a good car to buy? If they don't feel like they can go anywhere else, any of those questions seem fair game to a librarian.
Absolutely.
So they come in and go, can you help me from anything from, pre-gestational diabetes to, high blood pressure to how do you fix a carburetor in a 1967?
We can answer all this.
Yeah, exactly.
It's why librarians are good at trivia.
Yeah, probably. But it's also something you wouldn't expect. Like you think of librarian as like, it's got to be some noble, philosophical PhD question, but you can do anything from what is Vaseline made of to, how to build a spaceship.
We have a patron who is blind, and he used to work with seniors. That's another large portion of our population. The seniors love libraries. It's just, and it's a common, and we offer bookmobile service.
Sorry to interrupt. Do you think that'll change? Do you think that's because they were a text-based generation? Like they were a newspaper and magazine-based group? Or do you, in other words, when your average 15-year-old is 80, do you think the library, do you think it's because this is one of the few places where they can go put their hands on a book?
Millennials are, I would have said that, but the millennial generation is coming back around. So, and this is a challenge that I was going to touch on earlier that I meandered away from, but one of our big challenges, we lose people between the ages of like 20 and 40. And until they have kids and they bring their kids back in, like we lose them in those years. They're off at college, they're doing whatever, and until they have kids, they don't have a reason to come back. And like I said, I was exactly the same way. I didn't visit a public library that was the first time in a decade I'd stepped into a public library when I applied there.
Well, and part of it is you're so happy to be done with the library. After being in school, you get to that point where you just go, thank God I don't have to. You wipe your hands. You go, I don't have to be in a library anymore. I'm done my research. And so you enjoy the freedom of, and that may be, I just stumbled on something accidentally in my brain. That may be something we do wrong with libraries when kids are little, is that we teach them that it's the boring place where they have to go to do work. You're going to go to and so it becomes almost like a kid who's punished or a dog who's punished by putting him in their crate. They say you should never punish a dog by putting him or her in the crate, because like Zoe the pod dog, we don't ever punish her by putting her in her crate, but then she doesn't see it as a punishment. It's like if you teach a kid, it's like teachers that used to punish me by, or students by saying, well, for every minute you talk, you've got to read another 10 minutes at night.
Well,
using reading as a punishment, and you go, well, but it's good for them to read. And you go, yeah, but what you're teaching them is to hate reading.
Right.
Because so I wonder if libraries, because historically, I'm not a library fan. I don't love to read. So to go to a library for me is not appealing. But I love to learn. So the weird dichotomy of me is, man, I love to learn. But I'd rather sit and talk with you like this than go read a book on librarians.
Right.
So, maybe that's part of what we've done to society is, that book learning is hard, or book learning's not fun or enjoyable. But I also know, I see in my students and I'm a middle school teacher, I see in my students kids that carry books around, and the whole world could be on fire. And that kid is like, what?
That would have been me.
Yeah. You call that kid's name. I don't even know how you can concentrate. I can't concentrate when it's silent. Yeah, literally walking down reading a book. Or they'll walk into my classroom reading a book. And I go, how do you, there's a kid playing trumpet over there. How do you even concentrate? And they're like, what? I didn't even hear it. I've never had that ability to rule. Maybe that's why I'm not a reader fan. But, so we'll start winding things down here with a couple questions. What makes you feel successful when you come home at the end of a day, or even during the middle of your day? What kind of an interaction makes you go, this is why I'm here? Oh,
absolutely. I have a perfect example. So the other day, a lady came in and I think her driver's license was stolen or something like that. An older lady came in, her driver's license was stolen. She couldn't get her driver's license without her birth certificate, but her birth certificate, she was born in Seattle, Washington.
Okay.
And she couldn't figure out, she called the DMV. They weren't terribly helpful.
Really? No, I'm just kidding. No offense in case I ever get somebody from the DMV on the podcast.
Now, see, that's a perfect example of the attitudes toward libraries versus other governmental agencies.
That's
right. And just was not getting help from any of these agencies on what she needed to do. And so because of my passport knowledge, I'm like, well, I'm sure you have to go to the Department of Vital Records in Washington State, and they would be able to send you a copy of your birth certificate,
yeah.
And then that, or a certified copy, and then that birth certificate, once you probably have to pay a fee.
Yeah.
But she just had no idea, and nobody helped her, and I maybe only spent 10 minutes with her. She just burst into tears and said, you have helped me make more progress in 10 minutes than in spending hours on the phone with.
It's like your theory about the internet. There was so much water coming out of the internet hose.
Yes.
She couldn't find the cup she needed.
Right.
But you can narrow it down and say, put an umbrella over her and say, you don't need all that. You don't need all this. Here's the, and so, and that's really, it's not unlike when somebody walks into a Super Walmart or a Lowe's or a Home Depot and goes, I just need a piece of 1/4-inch round over trim. I have no idea. And then you run into one guy and they go, oh, aisle 17.
Right.
You just saved me an hour of walking every aisle in the store. So you're kind of that way when it comes to information and knowledge.
We're not, I always say, we don't know the answer to every question, but we know how to find the answer to every question.
Correct.
And that is critical in we're not gatekeepers.
Right.
We are tour guides, if you will.
I had a college professor at Shepherd University who was my science professor, and I was a music major, so I didn't really, science was a required core class, but not something that I signed up particularly to take. And the class was chemistry and society, which was basically, here's a science class for people that don't really need a lot of science training. But the teacher, I'll never forget his name, Dr. Warburton. He was from England. I think he was a visiting professor. Just a wonderful professor. And he said, the first day I knew I was going to love him, he said, this is not a class where I'm going to ask you to memorize the atomic weight of barium or, some element. If I want to know the atomic weight, I'll go look at the periodic table of the elements. That's why we built the periodic table of the elements. And I thought, this is a guy who gets it. It's not about, I don't need to know it on top of my head. I just need to know, if I need to know the atomic number, I can look at the chart. So in that same respect, and that's smart because nobody can know everything.
No.
So you don't necessarily know everything. You just know efficient ways of finding the everything.
Yes.
And those strategies can apply to whatever subject. You just plug in the subject and follow the same steps or slightly different steps depending on. But you have a pathway to get to whatever piece of information that person needs. And your job is just to say, you're standing in a roundhouse and you need to know which train track to take.
Right.
This is the one that's going to get you there, rather than them having to explore all of the routes themselves and figure it out.
Yes,
because
exactly.
you've done it before for 1,000 people, perhaps.
And maybe not even the exact same question. I mean, we get questions that are just bizarre. And of course, one guy's came in one day, this was early on in my career, and asked me where we kept the DNA tests. And I was like...
Like a 23andMe thing?
Well,
or like a paternity type?
He was asking about paternity, but I said, do you mean like books about DNA testing? Do you mean like... And he was like, no, like pipettes and swabs and stuff. And I was like...
Yeah.
No, but check with your pharmacy.
Right, yeah. If you ever get people... Do y'all have ski masks and potassium chloride? No,
well,
thank you.
We've had people who have printed out the anarchists' Bible or handbook or whatever it is.
So there's another question I just stumbled on that I didn't have in my prep here. At what point are you legally obligated to say something, or is somebody's choice of rented material completely? If they check out a book on how to build a bomb or ask you that question, I know they have the right to do that, but is there any or how to operate a semi-automatic rifle for maximum damage? I mean, I'm assuming there's books out there on everything. Mm-hmm. Are there any things that as a librarian you go, if a guy, I'm playing the stereotypical, hey, do you have any books on shooting up school? Like, at some point, is there any obligation on the library's part to go, this guy, we might want to...
There is not, although we very firmly believe that you are free to seek whatever information you want, particularly because, for example, if a kid comes in and is like, I want books on school shootings, you don't know whether he's doing a paper on it or whether he's planning on shooting up a school.
Understood.
And it's not on us to ask the why.
Right.
For why someone wants to know something. That said, it will not go unnoticed within the building. But if law
it doesn't
enforcement,
leave the building necessarily.
It doesn't leave the building unless law enforcement comes with a subpoena
and says, hey, we have reason to believe, can we see their checkout record? Does anybody monitor checkout records? Because you see in movies sometimes, the FBI comes in and goes, this guy's been checking out how to make, bombs or how to, does that happen? Is there ever any monitoring that triggers in any system anywhere?
Our patrons have the option of having us keep a reading list for them or not. Okay. So somebody can opt out.
Still, that stays within the building. It's not like something that somebody else monitors anywhere.
No, correct.
So people really do have true autonomy to come in and read about whatever they want.
Yeah, and privacy. Patron privacy is a huge thing, and I think that's part of why the trust level is there.
Gotcha.
Because it's I had a guy come in one time and asked me for information on the Hemlock Society, which is an organization that helps people commit suicide.
Okay.
Basically. And do I want to give that?
Was a poisonous, isn't that a poisonous
plant?
Plant, right.
Yeah. Do I want to give that guy that information?
Right.
Not really. But
Yeah, because he may be plotting his own demise
Correct.
or somebody else's.
But that's one of the
That's interesting.
trickier things in libraries. Like I've had people sort of joke, and a lot of times people will ask you questions just to see if they can get a rise out of you, which is another thing that happens. Like,
Gotcha.
hey, where are your books on how to shoot up a school? You
Right.
know, and they're just waiting for you, and you're like, oh, they're in the 600s.
And
Yeah.
then they go somewhere else.
Right. Yeah, because they're not getting a rise out of you.
Well, then let me ask you this. Is there any obligation, because now I'm thinking the other side of things, again, not a question I thought about ahead of time. What about obligation to report if, like a 14-year-old girl comes in and says, do you have any books on how to commit suicide?
We are court mandated reporters for
Mental or self-harm?
yes, and so particularly
Or a child comes in with bruises and says, I need a book about child abuse. Is it like teachers, you're required to report?
Yes, that's the case with that happens most frequently with children. So
Okay.
in the children's department, they are mandated to report if the child is in danger or seems to be if there's some kind of imminent danger, or like you said, they come in with bruises all over them.
Right.
That we do report it. And the same would be true for like elderly.
Elder abuse.
Elder abuse or neglect. But honestly, that
Pretty rare.
really rare.
Yeah.
Really rare.
Well, it's hard to tell. I mean, I know as a teacher, did the kid, it's all about where the bruises are and how often, but did the kid fall off their skateboard? Did they get hit? They're kids. Did they play football and got their shoulder dislocated, or did somebody jerk on their arm? And so you look at it and go, man, but, like it's a mandatory CPS call, and then it's CPS's job to investigate and determine the conclusions.
And I will say, though, if we have been trained and done a lot of trainings on if we see someone that we believe is in a state of crisis, like we have mobile social worker, like crisis units that we can call, like we have resources where we can call and say, this person is in a bad way. Can you come over and talk to them?
Gotcha.
And so while we're not responsible for doing it, we are responsible for recognizing the signs.
Yeah, of course.
And connecting them to a service that can help them.
That makes sense. Yeah, it's a big responsibility probably people don't think about, just like teaching. When you're dealing with especially underage, there's a lot of care and observation and then mandated response that has to happen regardless of the situation when you feel like somebody's in danger. If you weren't doing this job, what else would you try? If you quit tomorrow, what would be the first job that you would say, I would love to try that? Is it related at all to what you're doing now? And I didn't give you questions ahead of time to prepare, so I'm putting you on the spot. But
I have always thought, and I know myself, so I know that I would not have the wherewithal to work like 80 hours a week, which you have to do when you do this job. I've always wanted to run a little soup and sandwich shop.
Yeah.
I think that would be so much fun.
Okay.
I could just make big bowls of soup and sandwiches all day for people. It would be great. But
Serving.
But when you own your own business, that is your life.
Yeah.
You have to, and I know myself, I don't live to work. I work to live.
Right.
I would love to do anything working with animals. I used to work at a vet's office for a long time, and that was a joy, except when I was getting yelled at for how expensive the bill was by the customer when they came back to pick up the dog. But you're good with animals. Zoe, the pod dog, is a big fan. She's been laying there pretty quietly, so it must be soothing her with our wonderful tones. Yeah. But actually, there is one thing that I would, and this is sort of what I'm hoping for is next in my career path. The job that I'm in right now, I would not like to retire from doing. I would like to move on to something different within the library field, but to be a book purchaser. That is one of the things that I think would be so much fun.
So for a library or for Target or for any bookstore?
For a
library. So you would be the one they would say, here is your X amount of dollars to go buy books for the library.
Oh, yeah.
And your job would be literally to go out, read books, figure out what's hot, what's good.
Read reviews.
Gotcha.
Yeah, investigate. And I just think, because ultimately, I answered in a very typical way when I first interviewed for, well, why is it that you want to work in a library? Well, I love to read.
Right.
Which you will never do on the job.
No.
So.
No. No, but the fact that you love to read probably gives you a familiarity with books that helps you in the job. But it's not like, it's not like saying, why do you want to be a chef? Because I love to cook. Well, that's what you do as a chef.
Right.
But I want to be a librarian because I love to answer questions about how to find the DNA tests, which we don't have.
Right.
Or, you know,
Sometimes it's an absolutely hilarious job. Sometimes it's a heartbreaking job.
I would think.
And sometimes it is absolutely hilarious. You have to have a sense of humor.
Yeah.
You just do, because you'd never make it if you didn't.
Speaking of that, as throughout the rest of the podcast, maybe you had sent me, I had asked you for some funny library memes because I always like to have something humorous. So just periodically, I'll put some up in the, in between you and I over on this side of the screen here, or at the bottom, I'll put some library memes up just to make people smile about funny things that happen in the library, or the sense of humor that librarians have. And is there anything, before we go, is there anything that you'd like the public to know about libraries, librarians, or anything else related to your work that I didn't think to ask today?
No, just that I think it is such a critical institution, and it's such a foundational institution in our culture. And I really I would like people to speak up in favor of libraries if given the opportunity, because we really, it's very difficult to, nobody questions what's the point of teachers?
Right.
To constantly have to justify your own existence is extraordinarily difficult. So just...
Yeah, and to be fair, they don't have to do it if they're a math teacher, Now, I teach music, so it's probably a little more often that I have to try to justify my existence. But I get your point. People go, I have Google. Why do I need the library? Well, you don't know until you have that lady who's trying to figure out how to get her birth certificate, and she's Googled for 3 hours and can't figure out the answer. Yeah. But she walks into you, and you give her the answer in 10 minutes, and she goes, oh my gosh, I'm so glad this library was here.
Yes.
And without advocacy and budget considerations from politicians to support, because even though, like you say, you're quasi-state, meaning you still rely on somebody in Annapolis voting to give you money.
Yes.
And so we didn't even touch on it, but I'm sure that's part of the job too, for somebody in your business to advocate and go, hey, when you're divvying up the money, don't forget our library.
Absolutely.
So
just support your local public library. We do good work. We care a lot.
What's the best way to do that? Patronize them?
Patronize them,
Vote
yes.
for candidates, ask candidates that are running for local office.
Yes, vote with your feet. Come in once in a while. Don't just, use the digital resources, absolutely.
Do they keep track of the number of patrons in your building?
Oh, yes.
So if you have 100,000 people as opposed to 20,000 visit in a month, that says something to the people in Annapolis.
Absolutely. It is frustratingly, for something that is so qualitatively critical, the way we are
quantitatively measured
is completely, how do I put a quantitative, I spent 10 minutes with that lady,
right? But
that weighs a lot more than 10 minutes being like, oh, the bathroom's over there,
right? 100%. Yeah, just because they walk in doesn't mean that you're helping them, but just because they walk in doesn't mean you're not helping them too. So you can count bodies and go, okay, well, you served 30,000. Yeah, but maybe 8,000 of those people, you provided that level of service where they walked out in tears, like being so relieved that you helped them with something. And that doesn't count as the same as 8,000 teenagers coming in to play the video game computer,
Yes. Then it's that weight is another tricky thing that any kind of patronage that you can give to your local public library systems, we can always use it, because we're always fighting to justify our existence.
And as people say, it don't cost nothing. So,
it's free.
Go get and just experiment. Just go and look. Just take a trip to your local library and spend 2 hours walking around. And you might realize that, hey, wow, they've got some cool stuff I didn't even think about.
Maryland particularly has beautiful libraries.
Yeah.
Just really, really amazing library systems doing amazing things for people.
And contrary to what I used to believe, you can walk in and walk back out. In other words, I used to think people just disappeared in there. I used to think the books came alive and attacked people. No, I've never been a reader, which this sounds conceited, but people have said to me like, well, you seem like you know so much. You're so smart. How did you get so smart without learning, without reading? And I'd like talking to people, and I listen. but I'm not one of those people who can sit down and read. I fall asleep, or I read 3 pages and I go, wait, what did I just read? And I have to go back and read. I've lacked the focus to read. Like people go, oh, I sat down with that book and read it front to back and couldn't put it down. I go, I'm jealous of that. Perhaps I don't have the imagination for it, but people, talk about, quote, getting lost in a book. It's hard for me, but I wanted to do this because so many of my students, I'm encouraged when I hear my kids at school talk about how much they love to read. And I go, man, that's great. I envy them because there's so many great stories and so much great information in books in your local library through the resources they provide that probably so much of the public misses out on just because they don't know to come in and ask. So, and again, some of the memes I put up there above, some of them are pretty cute, so I just wanted to share that with them. And before we go, is there anything else did I forget to ask you anything or anything that you'd want to say before we sign off?
I don't think so. I can run my mouth for a long time
Well,
about a lot of things.
Well, the good news is we're not going to put these podcasts out too often, so the public has a while to digest it. They can digest it in stages. They don't have to eat the whole meal at once. So, ladies and gentlemen, we hope you enjoyed. Thank you, Shannon, for coming in. We hope you enjoyed having Shannon here today to talk about being a librarian and what's available in your public library. And as she said, please go out and vote with your feet. Go in there and just take a look. It doesn't cost you anything. It's easy to get a membership. I don't even know, do you need a photo ID or anything to get a...
You would need a photo ID with your current address in most library systems in the state of Maryland, but you do not need a library card to attend any of the programs. You
Gotcha.
only need it to take out materials.
I gotcha. So it costs you nothing. You don't even have to get a library card to at least go in and browse and look around. It's sort of an LRE, as they say, the least restrictive environment. You get to go in, you get to see what it's all about, and you may just find that there's something in there that sparks your interest that you didn't even know you were interested in until you saw it on the wall. And just experience the beauty. Your tax dollars help to fund these places, so go utilize the resources that you pay for. And it's not just for scholars, so even if you're not a highly educated person, you don't have to feel like it's a place for brains. It's a place for anybody who wants to go in there. Don't be intimidated. The librarians have heard every question you could possibly ask, so you don't have to be afraid to ask anything. We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Curious Minds podcast, episode number 2. The book stops here, pun intended. And we thank you very much for listening. Check us out on YouTube and tell a friend and subscribe to us and ring the bell there so that we can let you know anytime we put out a new podcast. We appreciate it and thank you very much. We'll see you next time.